Across the USSR, widespread protests and strikes broke out as many politicians, both communist and not, opposed the committee's actions. Furthermore, Western leaders condemned the coup and halted all cooperation with the USSR. Within the Soviet Union, the individual republics were split down these lines, and the committee wasn't without some support internationally. Communist states like Cuba, North Korea and China were supportive of the coup, since they felt that Yanayev and his colleagues were right and they had no interest whatsoever in losing the primary defender of global communism. Things started to heat up as demonstrations became more incensed and there were some isolated incidents of violence. This was also the point where some in the committee realised that they weren't going to be successful. The day was also rounded out by Estonia unilaterally declaring independence, which probably wasn't what the coup leaders were hoping for. Overnight, there was some fighting between soldiers on the side of the committee and those who had sided with Yeltsin's troops withstanding the assault. It was at this point that the rest of the committee realised that they had failed, and some of them subsequently fled Moscow. Yanayev opted to face his fate in Moscow, whereas the rest, barring one because, well, went to see Gorbachev in Crimea in order to hopefully not get purged once he was back in charge. The members of the military which had sided with the committee then switched allegiance and pulled all military forces out of Moscow. The Supreme Soviet, the Soviet Parliament, then announced that the crisis was over and that Gorbachev was restored as president. The coup was over. The remaining committee members were quickly rounded up and arrested, and order was restored to the streets of Moscow. There were several reasons for the coup's failure. The first was Gorbachev's refusal to resign, which robbed Yanayev of any legitimacy in the eyes of the public. Another was that the military wasn't entirely on board and politicians like Yeltsin kicked up a fuss. Yet the biggest reason that the coup failed was the people who took to the streets and stared down armed soldiers to prevent a return to the politics of old. Gorbachev's changes were popular and the coup's leaders assumed that taking control of the party meant that they could stop them. Yet, where they miscalculated was that the party was no longer able to override the people and their support for the changes. The coup effectively doomed the Soviet Union and the Communist Party there, and the USSR itself would only last for another 4 months. The leaders of the committee were imprisoned, and Yeltsin would go on to become Russia's first president. The last-ditch attempt to preserve the Soviet system was a failure, and the fact that it didn't spiral into a wider revolutionary conflict is honestly quite amazing.